I'm Jennifer Ouellette. I'm with Cocktail Party Physics and also Twisted Physics at Discovery News, and I'm here with...
I'm Chad Orzel. I run a blog called Uncertain Principles at scienceblogs.com, and that's the only blog thing I have going on at the moment.
Yeah, but you got that whole physics professor thing going on.
True.
So, you're at Union College.
Yes, I'm a professor at Union College in the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and do research on atomic physics there. So.
In Schenectady.
In Schenectady, New York, where the ideas come from.
Yeah. Or at least the odd pronunciations.
That's an old joke from, I think Harlan Ellison is the person I heard it from, who claimed that, people ask him all the time, where do you get your ideas from? He said, well, there's a little old lady in Schenectady, New York, and I send her $50 once a month, and she sends me 10 good story ideas.
That's a great story. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so.
You're a font of useful information.
Say again?
You're a font of useful information.
Or useless. I'm not sure about the useful part.
There's a place for trivia.
Some sort of information.
Right. So we have lots of stuff to talk about, but I wanted to first congratulate you because you're Big Daddy Chad now. You've got your first child.
That's right. We're calling her Steely Kid on the internet so that she'll won't necessarily be the first result of Google searches for her name. We don't want the embarrassing baby pictures to show up when she's a teenager. But,
they'll be there, but no one will know it's her.
Yeah. So she's 14 weeks today. So
how's that cutting into your blogging?
It's making it a little hard to maintain the usual level of productivity. I end up I'm doing the stay-at-home dad thing 3 days a week. While Kate, my wife, has gone back to work, and it's remarkable how she can't the baby can't actually move anywhere, and yet it's still a full-time occupation to keep up with her, and I can't get anything at all done during the day when I'm home with her because I'm constantly running to put the pacifier back in her mouth or change a diaper. Or find a toy, or whatever.
Yeah, wait till she starts
remarkably
crawling.
Exhausting.
When she starts crawling, it's going to be an issue.
Say again?
When she starts crawling, you're really going to have your hands full.
Oh, when she gets mobile, it's going to be a dead loss. I'm going to have to quit my day job. But actually, by the time she starts crawling, she'll be in daycare, and it'll be somebody else's problem.
So you're actually you're kind of experiencing this. I think what a lot of female scientists experience, which is having to do double duty between their job and their science. It sounds like you and Kate have a kind of you split the duties. It sounds like in terms of who stays home.
Yeah, it's it works out. It worked out so that I can rejuggle my teaching schedule so that I don't have to teach this term, and that way I didn't have any classes, so I can stay home 3 days a week and do all the administrative stuff I need to do on campus in only 2 days, and that way Kate can go back to work part time, and we can ease the transition there a little bit. It makes it a little tough on the research front, but it did push me to start experimenting with sort of open notebook science that people talk about. I set up a blog for my lab and have my research students, post daily updates on what it is that they're doing in the lab to this blog, so I can check that from home and respond to them with comments saying, you should, you're adjusting the wrong laser, or you should do this, you should do that, and so that's actually working remarkably well to keep me sort of apprised of what's going on.
This is kind of a new thing that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, this kind of open notebook thing. I mean, are a lot of professors starting to use this? I mean, I think even if you're not trying to stay home with a newborn baby, it could actually come in very handy. It's like a new way of doing science, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't know how widespread it really is. I went to this workshop at the Perimeter Institute back in September, and it was Cameron Nayland from is in the UK is doing this with his biochemistry lab, and talked about the benefits of it. And A lot of the people who do this talk about sort of philosophical benefits of openness and that sort of thing, and making the scientific process accessible to the entire world. My interest in it has been much narrower and purely selfish. It lets me be at home and have some idea what's going on. Mm-hmm. So, but I think it's there are I know of 3 or 4 people who do this, and whether that's the start of a trend or just a few quirky individuals, time will tell, I guess.
Well, these things always start out slow. I mean, Archive 10 years ago was almost non-existent, and now I think people can't imagine not putting their papers on Archive.
Yeah, Archive was, that grew out of a pre-existing community of people. Paul Ginsberg, who mm-hmm. Was the founder of the Archive, gives really interesting talks about the birth of the whole thing, and about some of the quirky things that he sees in the statistics. And he said, that came out of, there was already a community of, a few dozen people, I think, who were emailing preprints back and forth to each other as it was, and this was just putting it up on the web was just a way to save everybody some downloading, and it caught on really quickly. Mm-hmm. I think it started in about 91, if I remember correctly.
Right. Now, you actually do blog quite a bit about your research, and I've always loved that, because what I really love is you tell stories, true lab stories, essentially, yeah. Because, I mean, I visited you at Union College, I've seen your lab, so I know that you work at the low temperatures, you work with the lasers, you work with all this stuff that has a tendency to break down and not work properly the first 20 times and this sort of thing, and you do sometimes chronicle that on your blog, so I was kind of wondering if you could tell us what one of your favorite recent stories is and why you think it's important to maybe share this aspect.
And recently I haven't been getting in there that much. The all-time great lab stories are probably the ones involving floods, of which I've had an inordinate number. I guess it was only a couple months ago that I had the entire lab flood because we have the cooling water line that runs to maintain one of our vacuum pumps at a reasonable temperature, and that drains into the storm drain in the floor of the lab, which, because we're in the basement, storm drain actually goes to a sump pump that pumps the water back up to ground level and out somewhere. And that pump blew a fuse and stopped working, and nobody noticed because it's down in the basement somewhere until the water in my lab was about 2 inches deep. And so you can imagine that was a little frustrating.
Yeah. How do you have to wait for the water to drain, or are you down there with little buckets? Or
say again?
Do you have to wait for the water to drain, or are you down there with little buckets to clear it up? Or
it was a lot of shop vacuuming. Once they figured out what was wrong, I turned the water off as soon as this happened at 3 o'clock in the morning. Turned the water off as soon as I got over there, and once they figured out what was going on, the pump, turned the pump back on, and it took care of most of it. But there was a lot of shop vacuuming, a lot of paper towels and wet mops and so forth, mm-hmm. Which was it's kind of irritating. But,
right.
That's the cost of doing science. It was less spectacular than when I was in grad school. We had a flood because a hose that was coming out of the wall horizontally had a big, heavy plastic filter attached to it, and one night, the wee hours of the morning, that filter cracked. So there was a jet of water shooting up like a fountain, going halfway across the lab, where it hit an electrical raceway that ran above our optical tables and basically rained on all of our lasers because it was, it just happened to hit this power conduit that was situated directly above the one of the main lasers and just fountained down onto it. We had to take everything apart, and we thought we had escaped because the main optical table was encased in plastic sheeting and had a blower over the top of it. But it turns out the blower was located underneath the raceway as well. And so water dripped down into the blower, and it sprayed this mix of water and the dust from the air filters all over all of the optics on the table. So it was about, I think it was about a month of removing every single mirror and cleaning it and putting it back.
Well, at least, I mean, those are expensive things. I mean, they still worked. You just had to clean them, correct?
Yeah, astonishingly, the laser that got rained on, I mean, it was literally, the case of the laser had half an inch of water at the bottom of it. I mean, it was literally soaked. And continued to work fine after that, which, I sort of think Coherent Laser Corporation probably should have gotten, a testimonial from us and put it on their website.
I was just going to say, we need to find out who made that laser, because that is robustness for you right there.
It was a Coherent 899 for laser geeks. And so, it was pretty good titanium sapphire solid state ring laser. I was astonished that it continued to work.
Right. So just because people don't know you that well, talk a little bit about what your research involves, because I know you deal a lot with atomic physics and optics, not so much Bose-Einstein condensates or quantum blobs, as I've heard them called, but similar things to that. So you actually do require laser cooling and trapping. You need to actually, get these things cooled down to very low temperatures. And that requires a lot of expensive equipment. So maybe you could tell a little bit about what you're trying to find with all of this.
Yeah, the current project that we have going on is we're trying to use laser cooling and trapping of single Krypton atoms as a way of measuring radioactive backgrounds for people who are looking to make neutrino detectors. So the way it works is we inject Krypton gas into our system, and the atoms enter the system at something around the speed of sound, and we can slow them down to centimeter per second velocities just by hitting them with a laser beam. So every time an atom in the beam of atoms absorbs a photon from the laser beam, it gets a little kick in the direction that the photon was headed. And if the photon was headed in the opposite direction of the atom, that slows the atom down. And so by just hitting atoms over and over again with photons, we can reduce their velocity from the speed of sound to a few centimeters per second, and then trap them. And the nice thing about this for this background measurement is it's incredibly selective. The atoms will only absorb light that's tuned to within, a few megahertz of the frequency that's the resonant frequency for the atoms. So you have absolutely no chance of detecting a rubidium atom and mistaking it for a krypton atom. So when we're trying to trap krypton, we know that we will only trap krypton, and in fact we'll only trap one particular isotope of krypton. Mm-hmm. And then the way that they're trapped is they're held in place by these lasers that are bombarding them with photons, and so they're constantly scattering light. And you can detect even a single atom held in the trap by the light that it scatters. So you put a camera off to one side, or a very sensitive photon detector off to one side, you can see a single atom. You can tell the difference between one atom in the trap and 0 atoms in the trap. And so what we do with this is we're going to put in a sample of ultra-pure neon gas and count how many atoms of krypton we trap over a period of several hours. Mm-hmm. Which, then we can use that to tell exactly how much krypton is in that sample of neon. Which doesn't sound terribly interesting, but there are these people who are trying to build sort of the next generation of neutrino detectors that will be based on huge masses of neon. They're talking 100 metric tons of liquid neon as a scintillation medium. So it works just like the Super K detector in Japan, or the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory. You have this big volume of liquid, and every once in a great while, a neutrino will hit an atom in that liquid and cause a little flash of light. And so you ring this volume of liquid with photodetectors, and you pick up these little flashes, and that tells you when you detected neutrinos.
Right.
They care about the krypton because there's an isotope of krypton that is radioactive and beta decays in a way that will make exactly the same sort of flash of light that you expect to see from a neutrino, and will do it, right in the middle of the tank and right in the energy range that they really care about for their experiments.
Right.
So it would look like a neutrino detection when it isn't. And they work very hard to get this krypton out of their neon. And so what we would be able to do is to tell them, are you doing a good enough job to run your detector?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the project I've got going on. And I like it because it's the sort of thing. Union is a small college. We only have about 2,000 students. It's all undergraduates. And this is the sort of project that you can do. It's a project that I can do in a lab at Union with, relatively limited resources. But it connects up to these giant, multi-million-dollar experiments in astrophysics looking at really fundamental cosmological questions.
Right. And actually, that was something else I kind of wanted to bring up, which is you've written a lot on your blog from time to time about what it's like to be at a teaching college, and that it's not necessarily being a second-class citizen, that you in fact chose to go to a small teaching college as opposed to, say, a big Ivy League university or a major government lab or join a big physics collaboration. And and I've always thought that was a really important thing to bring up, because I think there does seem to be a little bit of a feeling that, someone who ends up at a small teaching college is somehow, not quite as good. And that's not necessarily the case. In fact, I hope it's not the case, because we want the really good scientists to be at the small teaching colleges.
Yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine, really, that people, you see this a lot in the comments on academic blogs, particularly in the sciences, where people saying, if you're not at a Research One university, you're a loser. You somehow failed, and you're not living up to the promise of your degree or whatever. And that drives me nuts, because, I was a grad student in a group at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, one of the top groups in the world. My advisor when I was there was Bill Phillips, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics. I was a postdoc at Yale doing Bose-Einstein condensation work. I've had a paper published in Science. I've done really good stuff. And when I went job hunting, I didn't, go out and say, I can't hack it, so I'm going to go for a teaching college. I said, these are the schools that I want to be at, because that's the background that I come from. Mm-hmm. I was an undergraduate at Williams College, which is one of these small liberal arts colleges, and really enjoyed that. Thought that atmosphere had a lot to offer, and wanted to be at a place like that. And so I deliberately sought small liberal arts college jobs. I didn't settle for this job. This is the job I was after. Mm-hmm. So it kind of irks me when people say that people are doing this because people are at small colleges because they couldn't make it at Harvard. Mm-hmm. That's not the case.
Right. And what do you like especially about Union? It's a nice college. I really liked the campus. I got the whole tour when I was up there, and the students in particular just seem, because it's a smaller student body. I went to a smaller college as well, and what you trade off in like the big showy names and things, you actually get in terms of personal attention, a little bit more sense of a community, I guess.
Yeah, the things that I really like about the small college atmosphere are you get to know students. We have the physics department. We have on the short side of 10 majors most years, and so you get to know them really well. You know who the students in your classes are. The largest class that I teach is about 18 students. So by the end of the term, I have a really good idea of what all of those students are like, what they're interested in, and can talk to them and relate to them outside the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really nice. The other, the big academic advantage that it offers is, we don't have graduate students. So we have pieces of apparatus in our department. We have an observatory with a fairly large telescope. We have a small particle accelerator. These are things that at a research university would be run by some grad student. It would be somebody's thesis project, and nobody else would get to touch it. But at Union, we have undergraduates who, if they're doing work on the accelerator, they spend a couple of weeks learning how to turn everything on and how to operate the accelerator. And then, when they want to take data, they go in and they take data. And they run the whole thing themselves, which is a fabulous experience for students setting out and starting to learn about physics and consider careers in physics. That gives them a much better sense of what research is like and what it means to be a physicist than you do from just doing labs and cookbook stuff. So.
Well, right, because most of them in like high school physics, pretty much it was textbook stuff, a couple of minor experiments, but they haven't really, the whole part of science that involves looking at something, asking questions, formulating a problem, figuring out how to test it, building the equipment to test it. This is what science is. So finding a way to get that across to students.
Yeah, a colleague of mine at Williams, Tiku Majumder, made a comment that I really liked once. And he said that the hardest part about breaking in new research students is getting them to realize that this is not a 3-hour lab. That you're coming and you're working on a problem that's a research problem. Like, I don't know that it's going to work. The fact that you haven't been able to get it to work in the course of 3 hours doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with the apparatus that I have to fix. It could just be it's a harder problem than that. And these things are sort of open-ended, and it's not something that you're going to come in and work on for an afternoon and then go on to the next class in your schedule.
Right.
It's something that maybe you'll get it to work this week, maybe you'll get it to work in a month.
Right.
You just have to keep at it and put as much time in as you can, and see where it goes. If we knew where it was going to go, it would be a lab class. It wouldn't be research.
Right, exactly, and that's a really key distinction. It also, I blogged about this a couple of times as well. We kind of have an unhealthy attitude towards failure, particularly in the American academic system, and a lot of science is about failing and going back to the drawing board and trying again and figuring out what you did wrong and keeping at it till you get it right. And you end up learning as much from your mistakes sometimes as you do if you had gotten it right on the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes I think that aspect gets lost because we only hear about the successes.
Yeah, I don't know that's really limited to science. I think pretty much anything in life you learn as much by making mistakes as you do by from the successes.
Yeah. So science is a life lesson.
Yeah, in science, I think it's it's somewhat magnified, but it's the same thing happens everywhere. It's a little more dramatic in science. Things catch fire when you fail. Figuring out why they caught fire teaches you a lot.
Right. So, blogging stuff. I know that you had said you wanted to do this because you wanted different video out there besides one of you dancing like a monkey, and I think that we might want to let some of the readers know what that was about. I think it's all John Scalzi's fault, isn't it?
It is. Well, it's mostly John Scalzi's
you made the promise.
Yeah. So Science Blogs, each of the last 3 years we've done this fundraiser for a charity called Donors Choose, where teachers make proposals for things that they would like to enhance their classrooms, and people can donate to specific projects that specific teachers are working on. So we have this charity fundraiser, and I set a goal for my challenge of something like $6,000 and said, I should offer some incentives for people to donate, and offered for moderate donations. I said I would write blog posts on the topic of people's choosing, but I said I needed some really big incentive, and after some consideration, I offered to dance like a monkey if the challenge passed the $6,000 mark, which John Scalzi thought was the funniest thing ever, and so he sent his thousands and thousands of readers my way, and it did, in fact, pass $6,000. So there's now a video I posted it on the blog, and it's on YouTube, of me dancing like a monkey and explaining, what exactly it means to dance like a monkey.
Which I think was very scientific of you to explore that.
What's that?
It was very scientific of you to explore that.
Yeah, well, it's important to do these things properly.
That's right.
I can't just go out and do anything at all and say that it's dancing like a monkey. I mean, in the sense that we're sort of all apes, I suppose any kind of dance that you do would be, monkey-ish. But you gotta do these things the right way.
Well, I think my favorite part of the video was the setup with you talking to Kate and explaining to her why you needed to fling poo around the house and how she wouldn't let you.
Yeah, she's way too good to me. She agreed to make the cameo in the video. And, I told her all you have to do is just look disgusted, shake your head, and walk away. And she said, I can do that.
Yeah, looking disgusted and walking away is kind of par for the course sometimes. So, the other thing that you blog about, you also have you're famous now for these little dialogues that you have, these sort of platonic dialogues that you have with your dog, Emmy.
Yes.
The Queen of Niskayuna. And I remember, reading the first ones of that. It's become kind of a semi-regular feature, and it's now going to be a book, correct?
It's going to be a book, and it's starting to look like it will actually really happen. I mean, I have a contract, so it will actually really happen. But
it will happen. It's just they're going to put you through hell first.
Yeah. So I spent a couple hours this morning working on the problematic Chapter 8, and I'm on the third draft of the manuscript, going through with my editor, and it's coming along pretty well.
Yeah, what's problematic about Chapter 8? As a writer, I'm interested in this because I know how hard it is to actually get, to write about some of this stuff in a very coherent, reasonable fashion that is also technically correct. I mean, it's really
Chapter 8 is about quantum teleportation, and so the dialogue that goes with it was really easy to do because it's the dog is always trying to catch squirrels in the backyard. The squirrels always get away from her. And so she, realizes that there's this thing called quantum teleportation, and then she can just build a teleporter like Star Trek, and then she could beam herself out into the middle of the backyard, and get to the trees before the squirrels do, and then she'd be able to catch them. And then I explained that no, that's not actually how quantum teleportation works. So the dialogue part came really easily. What didn't come so easily is explaining how quantum teleportation works, because it's really complicated.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the hardest thing that's in the book, because it ties together, there's a lot of stuff about uncertainty and quantum measurement that go into making a thing called the no cloning theorem, which is why you need to do teleportation in the first place. Mm-hmm. And then there's a lot of stuff about entanglement that goes with it, that these Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen, these spooky action at a distance states. So explaining all that is really tough. Getting it to a level where the dog can understand is kind of tricky. At one point in the process, I actually said, there are all these other books out there. There's, physics of Star Trek, physics of superheroes. These people have to have talked about this. And so I went to the library in search of these books. Actually, at night in the middle of what turned into an apocalyptic thunderstorm after I left the house.
Oh, wow.
I was driving around in Schenectady looking for some branch of the library that had a copy of Physics of Star Trek. And it turns out that he doesn't actually talk about quantum teleportation in there at all.
No, not really at all. I think he might discuss it a little bit in Beyond Star Trek.
Yeah, could be. I forgot that there's a sequel to that.
Yeah, there was a sequel.
Yeah, but I realized after looking at it that that book was written before any of the experiments on quantum teleportation were done. So there's no reason he would have written about it.
It's actually very difficult to describe. I mean, in my book, The Physics of the Buffyverse, I had a chapter on teleportation because, believe it or not, this shows up in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Mm-hmm. But I must have rewritten that chapter 4 times. The only chapter I rewrote more was the one on string theory and supersymmetry. I mean, it's just so difficult because you're dealing with these very abstract concepts. I mean, what the hell is a wave function? I mean, it's it's a very abstract mathematical idea, and it's very difficult for someone who is not an abstract thinker, i.e. the rest of us, to really try and envision what that means. And that's just one tiny aspect of the teleportation, which I think at one point I said it was this really elaborate kind of thing where you've got to entangle two particles and then have another one come in, and then through this weird sort of sleight of hand, one turns into the other.
Yeah, I'm working on trying to find a good analogy for it. I'm sort of fumbling around with things talking about compasses, because you say, like, well, you're teleporting states of photons, which you can think of as little arrows that point in a particular direction. And, how do you get two arrows at different locations pointing in the same direction? Well, you pull out a compass, and you say, okay, this one is 17 degrees east of north. That one also must be 17 degrees east of north. And that, the compass in the magnetic field kind of plays the role of the entangled photons, giving you a reference point that you can tie things to. But it's hard to come up with anything that really sounds relevant to the average dog.
Well, and that actually, I think, is what I loved about the book. I mean, I read a really, really early draft, I think. Mm-hmm. And the best part was that, it's Emmy. She's the everyman, although I think that she would take issue with being an everyman. But she's able to stop and ask the questions that the average man on the street would ask. And I think that one of the great things about you being a teacher, particularly at an undergraduate college, is that you kind of are still in touch with the kinds of questions that most of us end up asking. It's like, whoa, wait, do we mean this or do we mean something else? And that actually helped a lot, I thought.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about the whole conceit of explaining physics to the dog is that the way it's written, there's sort of a dialogue at the beginning of each chapter that's kind of a recounting of some conversation that I had with the dog, and then there's a straight physics explanation that goes with that, and then the conceit is like the dog is reading a draft over my shoulder and breaking in at points and saying, wait a minute, you didn't explain that, or like, what the heck does that mean? And that works nicely both to sort of get in some of the clarifications and important extra information that you need. And also it helps to kind of lighten the tone periodically.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, I think we need a Marley and Me for quantum physics, and that seems to me what you're writing.
Yeah, well, that's hopefully, if we could sell a tenth as many books as Marley and Me, they'd be doing pretty well.
Right. We had a list of stuff to talk about.
Well, yeah, you had you've recently added guest bloggers to Cocktail Party Physics for an interesting reason. So.
For lots of different reasons. I'm actually, writing a third book, and I needed to free up some time. And we'll get to the third reason in a moment. But also, there's this thing about blogging where sometimes you just get tired of the sound of your own voice. And sometimes you just kind of want to walk away for a bit, but you kind of want your regular readers to have something there. And the whole concept, I think, of Cocktail Party Physics was that it would be like a cocktail party. And after a while, I kind of started thinking, well, it would be great if we had some more guests. I had a really hard time getting guest bloggers, but when I said, what if I opened it up and had co-bloggers, I managed to get like 4 or 5 women who were interested in doing it. And yes, we're discriminating, against men by doing this. I mean, how would their voices be heard? But
I think we'll cope.
Yeah, you'll find a way. So I have Calla Cofield, who is a young and up-and-coming science writer. I wanted one very young voice. I wanted one person up-and-coming. There's me. There's my friend Lee Kottner, who's the one that designs all the avatars that I use, and is a writer and bookmaker in her own right. She actually makes handmade books and is a big science buff. She at one point had wanted to be a marine biology but couldn't do the math, essentially. We have Deandra Leslie Pilecki, who wrote The Physics of NASCAR. We have M.G. Lord, who has written a book called AstroTurf, which is kind of a personal memoir / history of Jet Propulsion Lab. And Allison Beatrice, who is a lab secretary who also writes books and just has a wonderfully unique, funny perspective, I think, on what it's like to be a lab secretary and deal with scientists on a day-to-day basis. So far, I'm really happy with how it's turned out. I like the new voices. I like the fact that there's, different opinions, different topics that I might cover coming in there. And I think I'm very happy with it. I'm so thrilled that they've all come on board. And, of course, the last reason is after 15 years as a freelancer, I have a new position. The National Academy of Sciences has started a science and entertainment exchange. It's based in Los Angeles, and the idea is that I will sort of be a mediator. I'll basically be, when writers or directors or producers are looking for a technical consultant for a TV series or a film, they'll call me, they'll say, well, this is the areas we're looking for, we need this, this, and this, and then I will try and find a scientist to conference with them or, become a regular or whatever. It's basically a way to try and get better science into the shows. Shows today, there's a lot of science-themed shows, and they actually really do need a lot of tech consultants. So, and it's not just all science fiction anymore. I mean, you actually do need everything from nanotechnology to forensics to mathematics to medical, all sorts of things.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a fantastic idea, because it's one of the never-ending peeves of scientists and science bloggers is, oh my God, can you believe how stupid the thing that they said about X was on TV?
I think IO9 just dubbed those facepalm moments where you just go, no, I can't believe they did that.
Yeah, or there's a whole website that's titled something like "Insultingly Stupid Movie Physics."
Exactly.
And anything that we can do to reduce the number of those.
Well, and I think part of the reason is, I mean, as fun as these websites are, it doesn't go far enough. I mean, it's one thing to point out, oh, you were wrong about this, this, and this, and this. What we're trying to do is get scientists involved earlier where they can brainstorm with the writers and say, well, have you thought maybe of trying this? And trying to kind of shape the creative process a little bit so that they don't so we're not always playing cleanup, let's put it that way.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You get people who do a good job with this stuff. A lot of times the excuse is like, well, we need the gun to have an infinite supply of bullets because otherwise it's not dramatically satisfying. And the people who do a good job with this stuff, you can write stories where you get the science right and it's still dramatic and exciting.
Right, and even if it's extrapolating, if it's a science fiction piece and it's more futuristic, at least it can make sense, in terms of how it extrapolates into the future. And that's kind of what we're trying to do here. Also, a lot of them do they're very curious. We've met with several writers by now and directors, and they're all very bright, very curious people. But obviously their world is not science, and they have lots of other things that they have to be pulling together in this creative thing. So, and they don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
And there's no way to go about finding a good tech consultant unless a friend of a friend of a friend, or they call some sort of local university department and they might get lucky and get a physicist willing to talk to them. But there's really no...
Most of the time it goes to the secretary who sort of, brushes them off like they do all the other cranks.
Exactly, and there's really no mechanism in place to help facilitate that. So I think the NAS is on the right track here. It's something I'm kind of interested in naturally. I did write a book about Buffy the Vampire Slayer in physics, and I'm a big film buff, so I have, in fact, I won't be freelancing for a couple of years now while we're doing this. But on the other hand, it's a chance to actually make a real difference. So
it's a really good, worthy project. Did you hear? There was several months ago. There was a workshop that. Trying to get this right. There's a NASA grant-funded workshop for science fiction writers.
Oh.
And they were at one of the big telescope facilities in New Mexico. There's a guy named Mike Brotherton who is both an astronomer and a science fiction writer. Put this together, and they had basically it was like a 4 or 5 day kind of crash course in modern astronomy for people who want to write science fiction stories set in space, so that they would, know what, there are these classifications of stars. What do those letters mean? And there's a black hole. What does that actually, what does it actually mean that there's a black hole somewhere? What would that realistically do? And sort of talk about some of the techniques that astronomers use to figure things out, so that these people can then go back to their to wherever it is that they write, and do stories that are more realistic. But get more of the flavor of science correct.
Right. And that's actually another aspect that I'm hoping will work into this new program. Because, I mean, I've been saying for about a year now that we need a kind of a cultural exchange program, because most people never really see the inside of a physics lab, or they never really visit a physics department. A friend of ours, David Salzberg, is the tech consultant for the Big Bang Theory sitcom. And while they were developing the show, he brought out, like, the set designers and the wardrobe mistress out to UCLA. And it really affected, you don't see any lab coats on that show. I mean, it actually, just letting them see what it really looks like, they didn't have to preach at them about lab coats. They didn't have to make a statement. They could just show them, this is what we do, this is what it looks like. And
yeah, lots of whiteboards.
Lots of whiteboards. There's whiteboards on the show. When you do see a lab, it's really old lab equipment, and, you know, you've got a grad student who's trying to cook something with liquid nitrogen. You know, things that would normally happen, you know, particularly late at night.
Yeah, somebody, you know, the apparatus with duct tape on it.
Exactly.
And all that sort of thing, yeah.
Because essentially there is, particularly with experimental physics, which is kind of why I like your blogging about the problems, is that sometimes that's really all it takes. I mean, you've got something that's a little loose, and you just put some super glue or some duct tape around it, and suddenly your experiment might work.
Yeah, tinfoil is another great one. I have a bunch of things that are shielded with pieces of tinfoil. You know, it works for hats.
But it also works apparently for lasers. So.
Exactly.
So, but you had mentioned that you read Neal Stephenson's Anathem, and I've heard kind of mixed feelings about that. And as a fellow sci-fi fan, and I've read some of his earlier stuff, I loved Snow Crash. Had a harder problem with some of the trilogies, but what did you think about it in terms of the rest of his work?
I think, you know, it's sort of it's similar to the trilogy that he just did, and that there's this, you know, huge, elaborate intellectual history that he's developed for this world that's kind of, you know, it's pretty much parallel to ours, but a little bit different. And he spends the first, I don't know, third or half of the book is all about, you know, sort of ways of organizing knowledge and ways of passing it on. And so, you know, thematically it kind of ties in with that. I thought it was a fascinating book in the world that it sets up is really neat. It's got these sort of monastic orders of people who are basically theoretical scientists who, you know, live in these monasteries, and they have different levels of monastery where, you know, the gate in opens once a year, once every 10 years, once every 100 years, or once every 1,000 years. And, you know, people who are in them work on different sorts of problems. And, you know, that part was fascinating, and how they work out what the, you know, there's a problem that shakes this whole system. I'm not going to spoil it for people.
Yeah, we don't want spoilers here.
You know, the process by which they figure out what's going on and you know, acquire information about it is all, you know, absolutely first rate. It goes a little wonky toward the end, where he starts bringing in all of this stuff about, you know, multiverses and many worlds theory of quantum mechanics.
Which, by the way, you just pointed out in a blog post that people get those confused.
Yeah,
and they do. You're absolutely right.
He sort of mashes them together in a way that, you know, that annoyed me perhaps more than it should, but, you know, that's chapter 4 of the book in progress. And so.
Well, I think that, you know, in the interest of getting this information out there, you could maybe, you know, tell the viewers a little bit about what is the difference between standard multiverse theory and many worlds. I mean, many worlds means something very, very specific.
Yeah, so many worlds theory of quantum mechanics is a very specific thing. It was developed by a guy named Hugh Everett, who was a grad student at Princeton in the 50s. And it's a way around, you know, if you hear people talk about quantum mechanics, they talk about, you know, these superposition states. You have a cat that's half alive and half dead at the same time. And when you open the box, then you know, the cat collapses into one state or the other. And there's this very mysterious process that happens there, this wave function collapse, where you have something that's in two states at the same time, and somehow it chooses one of the two, and this collapse occurs. And what Everett realized is that, you know, you could avoid the problem of this collapse by just saying there is no collapse, and that you have this wave function that is constantly expanding and sort of splitting off new branches. So every time you come to a situation where there has to be a choice, where the cat is either alive or it's dead, then at that point the wave function sort of splits into two branches, and in one of them the cat is observed to be alive and everything carries on from there. And the other one that's parallel to that, you have the cat is observed to be dead and everything carries on from there. And this solves the mathematical, sort of philosophical problem with having this wave function collapse thing. And there's a whole apparatus that goes with this that has been worked out in a great deal of detail. And the essence of the theory, though, is that there is one universe and there is one wave function for the universe. And this wave function just has sort of infinitely many pieces to it.
Okay.
Then the other thing that this gets lumped in with is sort of multiverse theory, which comes out of the realization that there's no obvious reason why the laws of physics have to be exactly the way that they are. And you could have a lot of constants of nature, things, something's called the fine structure constant, the mass of the proton, the mass of the electron, various other fundamental properties, the charges of fundamental particles and so on, could perfectly well have different values than they do. And there's no obvious reason why they should have selected the values that they have. And there's sort of a branch of cosmology that says, well, if any of these things are possible, all of them are possible, therefore all of them must exist in universes somewhere. And rather than having a single Big Bang that creates our universe and only our universe, they sort of imagine a whole series of Big Bangs in different places, or possibly there's one Big Bang, but patches of the universe evolve with different physical laws, and so that these areas where the laws of nature are fundamentally different are effectively distinct universes.
Okay.
And so these two things kind of get confused in that people will treat the extra branches of the wave function in many worlds theory are, in some sense, they're like parallel universes in that it's some different sequence of events has happened than the other branches of the wave function, and they are completely inaccessible from the other branches of the wave function. So in that sense, they're like parallel universes, but they're not really. It's not that when you open the box, you create an entirely new universe with stars and planets and galaxies, and it differs only from ours in whether the cat in the box is alive or dead. What you really have is only one set of matter with different possible outcomes in these wave function branches. That is something very different than the many parallel universes that are created by many Big Bangs occurring in parallel that goes into the multiverse theory.
Right.
And so Stephenson kind of, in Anathem, he sort of blurs the distinction between those two. And that ended up annoying me.
That happens a lot. I mean, that came up when I was writing the Buffyverse book. It's the reason why I had to struggle through those distinctions, was because you start out with kind of alternate reality, which is a little closer to the many worlds theory, and then they had different extra dimensions with connected by wormholes, which is more of a multiverse, and it just became very confusing. So I think a lot of sci-fi writers like to play with the idea, and they're not always consistent.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an absolutely fabulous conceit for a story. I mean, the idea that you have, there are thousands of examples, right? And Spock with a goatee,
right?
The famous Star Trek example. An entire universe where everything is reversed from ours, and that in an infinitely large cosmos containing infinitely many universes, there has to be some universe somewhere where Leonard Nimoy really does have a goatee and is evil.
Right.
That's got to be out there somewhere. But it's not the same thing as many worlds. So you get a lot of, anytime you talk about many worlds, you get a whole lot of questions from people that are essentially confusing it with multiverse theory or vice versa.
Right.
And so, it gets a little, there's very subtle distinctions between them, and they're hard to sort out.
And there was actually a movie that was released this year called Parallel Worlds, Parallel Lives. It was Hugh Everett III's son, who is a rock musician, and
he's the lead singer of the Eels,
which is a great band. I mean, they're on permanent rotation on my workout list. And so, I thought that was a kind of nice merging of like rock music and physics.
Yeah, it was on. I think they showed that on Nova, which I missed it. Yeah, I thought it was on at 9. In my universe, it was actually on at 8. So I ended up missing it. I'll have to check that out.
On a different universe, you saw it and you loved it.
Yes, exactly.
But actually, that is one other thing. Your blog doesn't just talk about physics, and I have to tell you that I've gotten some of my best music recommendations from when you've done your little playlists. The Hold Steady is now one of my favorite bands.
Hold Steady are awesome.
Yeah.
I get this from, I listen at work. I listen to KEXP, which is a radio station in Seattle, at some alternative station. I listen to there, and they helpfully have their playlist on the website. And so every now and then I hear something that I'm like, oh, I have to know what this is. Go write it down and get iTunes when I get home. So the Hold Steady were a great find. They're a terrific band.
And apparently they have these things now where you can be listening to the radio, and if you like it, you can push a button, and it will automatically get sent to iTunes, and then when you get home, you can download it onto your player. That's a little freaky.
That's but that would be nice.
Technology is because we never know. We're listening, we're driving along, we hear a snatch of something, we didn't hear the intro. They don't always announce who the band is.
Yeah, I've done a thing. Kate looks at me really funny where I will occasionally sit in the car, with the engine running. Like after we get to wherever we're going, I'll sit there with the engine running, just hoping that the DJ will say the name of the band that they just played.
Yeah.
And so.
And they never do.
They never do. No, it's incredibly compelling. So that's one of the really good things about the internet for music is you can actually listen to things in a place where you have that information right in front of you. Mm-hmm. You can write it down and go get somewhere else and pick it up.
And the other thing is that a lot of there are some bands and songs out there that are starting to come up with more certain scientific elements to it. There's a rap band called Park-like Setting that actually has a rap called Physics. And I know that you've linked to a few in the past, and I've started collecting them myself as a result of that. It's kind of fun. It's a kind of a geeky little in-joke.
Yeah. There's some that are sort of, entirely in-jokes, like MC Hawking.
Oh, right.
But
and the LHC rap.
Yeah. There are a few things out there that they're doing some science stuff now. I'm trying to remember the name of the band. There's a song that comes around on my iTunes periodically. Something about it's Troubled Hubble is the name of the band. It's a song. There's several songs that have science things in them. I'm pretty sure I can see molecules. So which is it's pretty good.
Yeah, under certain conditions you can, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, strictly speaking, everything you see is made of molecules, right?
Exactly, right.
Individual ones, not so much.
Right. Well, we got about 3 more minutes here. Is there something we haven't discussed that?
I don't know. Well, the other big blogosphere sort of happening recently was cosmic variance moving to Discover, which has sort of kicked off this weird wave of anti-blog consolidation comments. And
it's like, dude, you sold out to the man.
Yeah, I was, I don't know. As a noble freelance writer, do you have feelings about people selling out to the man?
Oh, well, I think that if someone is going to pay me to blog, yay, because I make my living off of this, or at least I did until 2 days ago. I think for Cosmic Variants, it's less that they need the money, but I mean, it is helpful to have the tech support. There are advantages. Mm-hmm. They get a new, broader audience by going to Discover Magazine that they might not otherwise have reached. And I'm sure that you found this when you joined up with the Seed Science blogs as well. I mean, it just
absolutely. Day one of Science blogs, I had 4 times as many visitors as I ever did when I was on my own site.
Exactly. And I actually, I can actually speak a little bit to the difference between these things because I have 2 blogs. I have the Cocktail Party Physics blog, which is my own, and now a group blog, and completely non-profit, no ads. It's just kind of my own little private playground, and now with my co-bloggers. But I also write a blog called Twisted Physics for Discovery News for a minimal amount of pay. I post like 3 short posts a week, and it's a little bit different. I pay a lot more attention to traffic, and I try and actually, keep the posts a little bit shorter because the long posts, kind of does detract from the audience a little bit. I try and put fun things in there. But there's really no basic difference. The difference is that, you're actually, part of a little online bloggy community, and you get some tech support. You've got some killer graphics that when they kick in, that they can kind of feature your posts on a page occasionally that I wouldn't have on my own blog. So I think there's advantages to both. What I don't understand is this tension, this idea that, blogging is this pure, noble, selfless thing, and that, we can't let the riffraff come in and, start making money off it. There'll still be room for the amateurs, but there's nothing wrong with having a more professional blogosphere.
Yeah, and I think the problem with that some people see with a lot of this is that they're afraid that Cosmic Variants is going to become Gawker, that it's going to be some one of these blog sweatshop operations where they have people who have to churn out lots of snarky little posts a day,
and they can die. The internet can kill you.
Yeah, and that's just not going to happen. Sites that move to science blogs, where I am, I'm doing the same sort of thing that I was doing when I was posting it on my own. And the difference is now I get a fairly trivial amount of money for it, and I'm sure the same will be true of Cosmic Variants.
Right,
there won't be any externally imposed editorial style or anything that's going to...
Right, and that I think is very important. Whenever, places come to me who are thinking of setting up, like media places, and they're thinking of setting up blogging, and they start asking me, well, what are some of the requirements? And I says, let me tell you, you're not going to get any self-respecting blogger that will come on board if you're going to edit them at all.
Yeah.
And that's, you're missing the point of what blogging is. I think I probably tend to edit myself a little more on Twisted Physics. I try and make it a little bit more polished. There are still typos because that's me. It's like...
Yeah, there's a little more, being on science blogs, I do self-censor a little bit more. I do, occasionally, particularly on political posts, I'll go back and delete some of the cuss words.
Right.
And that sort of thing, because I'm aware that it's a bigger audience than it was just me ranting on my own website.
Right, and I also think that that's an important aspect. I mean, yeah, the internet is this big free thing, but on the other hand, I mean, you're on the line. This is a public forum, and sometimes I think we forget that. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to think a moment before you hit publish.
I also think, it's a really useful skill. Like, the book that I'm doing came out of stuff that I wrote on the blog, and I don't think I would have been able to do it if I hadn't been writing, the blog for all these years, because I've been doing this since 2001.
Right.
And I think it's important in that it gives you a forum in which to learn to write for an audience, and you find some voice that works, and okay, hey, this works to explain things well. This generates a lot of comments. You figure out things that work and don't work.
It's a laboratory for science communication, essentially.
Exactly.
What's effective?
And I think that's essential. I think, I've I don't know, a rant that I've gone off on a number of times in other contexts is, people are constantly talking about blogdom as, as opposed to the mainstream media, MSM. and and that it's somehow some counter to things that are being said in the regular media, and viewing blogging only as punditry, and I don't think that's
it can be really, a lot more than that.
Yeah, and I think to the extent that blogging will ever really change the world, which it's debatable whether that'll really happen or not. But I any real transformative power that's going to come out of blogging as a medium is going to be through empowering absolutely anybody to go out and tell their own stories, and I think that produces some really interesting effects. I know a whole lot more about economics from reading Brad DeLong's blog
than I ever would have. I know.
Like what it is that economists do with their time. A lot of scholarship, a lot of scholarly blogs in the humanities, Crooked Timber, Acephalus, places like that. I have a better feel for what it is that my colleagues on the other side of campus are wrestling with, because I read these things that people put out there, and you see some of the thought process and what are the issues that they struggle with and so on. So that's part of the reason you mentioned the sort of life in the lab stories that I do on the blog, and that's part of the reason for doing that. I put out there here's a classification of vacuum pumps in terms of how annoying they are to work with.
Yeah,
because that's the sort of stuff that you worry about if you're an experimental physicist, and and people should know that.
Yeah, and now it's on the internet.
See that aspect of how things work. And there's some really weird ones. I mean, it's no longer active, but 4 or 5 years ago there was a blog called True Porn Clerk Stories, which was absolutely fabulous. It was this person who was working in an adult video store and blogging about the stuff that happened in the adult video store, and it was hilarious.
Yeah, real life stories.
Yeah, not anything that you would ever find out about any other way.
Right.
So I think that's really if blogs are going to change the world, make the world a different place than it is now, I think that's the angle it's going to come from. Not so much as serving as a farm team for the New York Times editorial page.
Right. I think there will be an aspect of that, but it won't be the heart of the blogosphere.
Yeah. And it's the same thing with with YouTube. I think the interesting thing about YouTube is not so much that people can put up great lectures. You put up video of Feynman talking about QED. I mean, that's nice, but what's really interesting about something like YouTube is the thousands of frat boys who go out and reenact wrestling things or just stupid stunts. And
Mentos and Diet Coke. I mean.
Yeah, Mentos and Diet Coke, or there's a great one of people doing beer pong, throwing ping pong balls into cups of beer, while skateboarding and bouncing it down the stairwell, and it bounces off 4 different things and falls into a cup.
It's like Candid Camera.
Yeah, the amount of time that somebody spent hours making this little Rube Goldberg thing work because they could put it on the internet and a million people could watch it.
Yeah.
And what that does to society is going to be a really interesting thing to see.
Which I think is a good place to stop.